So good morning and good afternoon, everybody, let us go ahead and get started with our presentation for today. The topic of the presentation for today is Scaling Agile in the Enterprise with Kanban, to be given by David Anderson, who will be presenting shortly. David Anderson probably needs no introduction. He's a thought leader and pioneer in the field of lean Kanban for software development and managing effective software teams. He has over 25 years in the software industry, starting with computer games in the early 1980s. He led software teams delivering great productivity and quality using innovative agile methods. He developed the Microsoft framework for CMMI process improvement for Microsoft, and he's also co-author for the SCI technical note, CMMI and Agile, why not embrace both. David has written 2 books, Agile Management for Software Engineering and Kanban, Successful Evolutionary Change for your Technology and Business. And David is also founder of the Lean Software and Systems Consortium, a not-for-profit dedicated to promoting greater professionalism and better economic outcomes in our industry in software. I am your host today. My name is Mahesh Singh, and I'm Senior Vice President for Product with Digite. And we're very proud to be associated with David Anderson and to be sponsoring these webinars. Just a quick introduction about Digite, and I will then hand over the controls to David. Digite is a pioneer in the web-based applications for project management, process governance, and software development lifecycle management. We've been around since the last nearly 9 years and have a presence in North America, Europe, Asia Pacific, including India. And we provide some of the leading solutions for application lifecycle management and software development, along with project management. Digite's Swift-Kanban product is the latest offering that we have for teams and enterprises that are trying to implement Kanban throughout the enterprise. We will give you more details about the company and our contact information by the end of the presentation.
Has left the conference.
Let me go ahead and hand over control to David. David, you're on, and I think you'll need to share the slides again.
So I was going to ask that. There's a problem with the sharing. So you weren't seeing anything while you were talking. All right.
That's correct.
I don't know what happened, why it stopped sharing. So let's try this again. Okay, can you see this now, Mahesh?
Yes.
All right, very good. So here was the slides that everyone missed while we were talking. And these slides will be available after the webinar. Is that correct, Mahesh?
That is correct.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about Kanban and using it to scale Agile in the enterprise. Some of you on the call today may have attended the previous one, our previous webinar, approximately 2 weeks ago. And that was really a beginner session, an introduction to Kanban. This is very much more an advanced session. And while at the moment on the screen there I have information about the book that I've written about using Kanban to drive evolutionary change in the technology business, today's webinar really goes beyond the content that's in that book. So there were a certain number of assumptions in this presentation and a level of assumed knowledge about the basics of Kanban. And therefore, I won't stop to explain some of those basics as we only have an hour to complete this. Just a reminder that if you find this very interesting, I am chairing the Lean Software and Systems Conference in beautiful Long Beach, California, from the 3rd to the 6th of May. And Digite are a gold sponsor at that event, and they will be showing their Swift-Kanban tool at a booth there. So if you find this interesting, we'd love to see you in Long Beach. You can register at lssc11.venessc.org. Okay, so what is enterprise agility? It's a good question. And what does agility mean in an enterprise context?
Has left the conference.
I define it as the ability to respond quickly to unfolding events or opportunities. To respond quickly to those unfolding events or opportunities, we will need the ability to make progress with imperfect information. This is really a core value behind the Agile movement, and the idea that we can course correct and rework or iterate as new information becomes available. We'll need to build a high trust culture free of bureaucracy, negotiation, contracts, audit, and arbitration. Perhaps free is too strong of a word. It'd be good if we could just have less bureaucracy, less negotiation, fewer contracts, perhaps looser contracts, much less audit, and hopefully no need for arbitration. And then we'd like the ability to flow work quickly, treating work in progress as though it were a liability rather than an asset. And if we could do all three of those things, we would have the capability to respond quickly to unfolding events or opportunities, and we'd exhibit agility as an enterprise. So if we can do all this, we'll have a truly agile organization. And you notice I've used a small a in italics there, because I really don't consider that organizations that merely adopt the practices of agile software development or agile project management methods are necessarily agile. Stating intent is easy. How to get there is the challenge. You can't create a culture and a mindset changes by management decree. Simply asking people to behave in an agile way will not make it happen. Asking them to think in an agile way won't make it happen. Asking for a higher level of trust in an organization won't make it happen. There needs to be leadership by example. But often I find that management leads with wishful thinking, and that just tends to leave behind disillusionment and apathy with the workforce. And yet it's been possible for over a decade to create successful pockets of agility within an enterprise using agile software development methods. However, there's been a continued struggle to scale those methods across large organizations. It's proven particularly troublesome, and many of the larger examples have really failed to demonstrate the bottom line performance improvements that management had hoped for when they pursued a large scale agile method adoption. And please bear with me a moment because my slides are misbehaving. Okay. Often meeting with resistance as each new team is asked to change its behavior and practices. The real issue with this is that a method that might be appropriate for one team within an organization is often not the best fit for other teams, even within the same business unit, and team members will resist. Resistance from individual contributors is often met with a push from management for compliance, and we've seen a number of ways to push for that within the Agile community, the idea of testing compliance against practice adoption, for example, and incentivizing middle managers who receive bonus payments based on how many practices have been adopted by their organization. But often these pushes by management for compliance with a method is met with greater, though often passive, resistance, which is particularly evil because you can't really see it other than you don't see the improvements. The results of such enterprise Agile initiatives are often lackluster at best and generally show little improvement in business performance. And I personally find that some larger companies that have pursued management by decree enterprise Agile adoption for 4 or 5 years, they approach me as a consultant to ask why it's not working. And it's not working because they're taking completely the wrong approach. They're trying to hammer Agile into their organization rather than change the culture. So the challenge has been to find ways to scale these isolated pockets of agility across an enterprise, and I've been thinking about this for most of the last decade. We need to demonstrate both broad adoption and significant business benefits as a direct result of any Agile enterprise initiative, or really it hasn't been worth pursuing. Changes driven by management often meet with resistance. Changes imposed out of context meet with resistance. There's a stronger chance of success with a method that can scale out incrementally, be tailored to a specific local context, and meet with minimal resistance. In other words, we have to be able to grow into being an Agile organization, and we need to do that in an Agile way. It needs to be iterative and incremental. It needs to evolve. We need to apply Agile thinking to change management initiatives within organizations. I believe that Kanban offers the possibility of success with enterprise scale agility, and the remainder of this webinar will explain why. So to recap, to respond quickly to unfolding events and opportunities, we need to make progress with imperfect information, to build a high trust culture, to flow work quickly, and to scale our system or process solution with minimal resistance. If we can do all 4 of those, we have a chance of achieving enterprise scale agility. So, first of all, I'd like to do a very brief recap on the Kanban approach to change in the use of Kanban systems. Something which is not particularly well covered in the current book and will be addressed in a future book is the system thinking approach that I use with Kanban.
Hey David, I'm going to briefly interrupt here. I just wanted to mention that I think your voice may be coming a little too softly, so if you could maybe speak in the microphone, it might be heard better by everybody.
Okay, I will try speaking up.
Thank you.
Kanban takes an outside-in approach to system thinking and systems of process design. First of all, what do I mean by system thinking? It's the idea that we look at the process throughout the organization as one cohesive system. It's a holistic approach designed to produce the output that we desire. So we look at the entire organization and we don't look at the parts in isolation. We don't make an assumption that improving the performance of one of the parts will improve the performance of the whole system. So the first thing when we approach a team that may require the use of a Kanban system, a work in progress limited pool system, is to analyze the demand. So we do this initial demand analysis, and we ask those teams to describe the customers and other stakeholders that they work with, and analyze the demand for the types of work that those people send to that team. We look at the arrival rate, we look at seasonal fluctuations, and we seek to understand the customer expectations, even if those expectations are currently unreasonable. And we ask the team to describe sources of internal dissatisfaction, the variability that randomizes their process and prevents them from doing effective work. And then, if possible, we go and ask the customers what their sources of dissatisfaction are, or points of conflict that they have with the team as a supplier. Once we've asked those questions, we visualize and map their workflow, and here's an example one. Many of you may recognize it from presentations that I've given in the past or training classes. And in this example, we have a team of developers and testers who take a number of different types of work from 4 sources, 4 product managers. And those types of work are change requests, requests for estimates, and something called PTCs, which stood for production text change. And the workflow for the PTCs is slightly different, as it arrives directly into the testing team, where the change requests flow through developers and testers, and estimates have a slightly different workflow also, as they arrive in parallel at the developers and testers. So we have 3 types of work, we have 3 slightly different workflows, and we're visualizing it in this instance with a stickman drawing and some arrows.
Has left the
If we were
conference.
to document this demand analysis, we might state that the customers are product managers, that they send change requests, estimates, and PTCs. And if we look at the demands, in that particular example, there were approximately 21 change requests and requests for estimates per month. And the PTCs arrived in seasonal bursts. Perhaps there would be none for 2 or 3 months, and then a few dozen of them might arrive all at the same time. And if we ask the team for sources of internal dissatisfaction, they might complain that the PTC arrival rate was intermittent and that the batches of arrivals tended to interrupt the work they were doing. But that was relatively minor in comparison to the problem of being constantly interrupted to make estimates while they were performing the development and testing of the change requests. Meanwhile, if we ask the customers, the product managers and the ultimate customers sitting behind them, for their dissatisfaction, and in that particular case, the finance department of the company, the human resource department, and several others that were represented by the product managers, they would have responded to say this team was too slow, the lead times were long, the delivery was totally unpredictable, and nothing was ever on time. So once we have that information, we might seek to design a Kanban system. And the Kanban system may look like the one in this diagram, where we've inserted an input queue between the backlog and the developers, and the buffer queue combination between the developers and testers, and that acts as an input queue for the PTCs arriving. The first input queue receives the change requests from the backlog, and we're going to limit the quantity of change requests moving through the system, limit the number of items that these developers and testers are working on. So we have implemented a Kanban system, and that is in response to some of the sources of variability and problems that are being caused. This system will no longer process estimates. What we'll do is we'll guarantee delivery within 25 days of a change request item being pulled into the backlog. So the estimation work goes away altogether, which deals with a major source of dissatisfaction and a major source of the unpredictability in the delivery rate. In addition, the Kanban system WIP limits will address the variable nature of arrival of PTCs. If a batch of PTCs arrives, the queue to the right-hand side there will be overloaded. This will mean that no new development work will get started for a while. However, there won't be any commitments made, so it's not possible to disappoint the customers, other than for perhaps 8 items that might be in progress at that time. So the Kanban system helps us address some of those problems, and we use this approach, the system thinking approach, where we look at what do the customers need, what's making them unhappy, what types of work do they provide to the system, what happens inside, and what's causing the people working inside the system to be unhappy about their performance and their ability to do a professional job. And we address those problems when we design the Kanban system. In addition to the pool system for the work item types, we also offer a package of classes of service, and in this example we might offer the ability to expedite a maximum of 1 request at a time. We may also offer fixed delivery date against the PTCs, providing we have 12 days advance notice. And we would make these offers based on analysis of real data from historical information. And finally, we would offer up to 25 days, 95% on-time guaranteed for the change requests, the normal work that's being processed every day through the system. The interesting thing about these classes of service is that they're designed to address the demands that the business is making. It turns out in the example that I'm thinking of here, one type of PTCs were tax table changes for the payroll system at this company. And the interesting thing about tax table changes is they have a hard delivery date. In the United States, the federal government will typically provide them to payroll system vendors and companies that require information on tax tables. They'll provide the tax tables for the following year towards the end of September. Those updates have to be deployed into the system before the end of the year so that the companies can make payroll with appropriate tax deductions in the middle of January. So there's really a hard and immovable date associated with work of that nature. And the customer may be uncomfortable if they feel that you haven't provided a commitment to meet that hard deliverable date. One way to do that, of course, is to estimate everything and make individual promises, but perhaps it's easier to create a class of service where we say all work of this type, providing the demand is similar to what we've seen in the past, all work of this type will be processed within 12 days and delivered against a fixed delivery date. And if we're in jeopardy of missing that date, then we will use our expedite capability to ensure that we hit it. And all of that will be possible because the promise we're making on the standard work, in this case the change requests, has enough flexibility built into it that we're saying up to 25 days, 95% of the time, but perhaps we really have the capability to process these requests within 12 to 14 days under normal circumstances. But 25 days is more than good enough when we examine the economics and the risk profile associated with that work, and is sufficient to satisfy the customer. So our 25-day guarantee for change requests is satisfactory. It gives us enough flexibility to deliver PTCs on time every time, providing we have 12 days notice. And in the event that something becomes problematic, we will expedite it by hand carrying it through the process, allowing it to jump queues, take priority, perhaps swarm team members on it to get it completed quickly. Such a system should lead to improved stakeholder satisfaction, happier customers, happier employees. Right, so how does Kanban help with our enterprise scale agility problem? If we can implement a Kanban system for one team or one department, how might that help us deal with a larger scale enterprise agile challenge? How can we show that the larger enterprise is capable of making progress with imperfect information, building a high trust culture, flowing work quickly, and scaling with minimal resistance? So I'd like to explain how Kanban addresses these issues. First, let's make progress with imperfect information. Well, Kanban allows us or encourages us to state the policies for pull criteria and selection into queues very explicitly. Agile people might use the term definition of done, but with Kanban we encourage definition of done for every stage in the process. This improves our risk management. It really makes it explicit the information required before work can or should be started or allowed to flow forward. And when we make things explicit, that encourages conversations about appropriateness. So we get improved risk management. There is the possibility to argue for let's move forward, keep things flowing, even if we do have to rework. The focus on flow in Kanban discourages delays for waiting for additional information. Again, it improves our risk management and decision making regarding information arrival. The waterfall SDLC assumption of we should wait as long as it takes to get perfect information because rework's highly costly isn't necessarily correct. And we can take a more informed and intentional view of when it's appropriate to move forward and how much information we really need and how much rework we're willing to absorb. The rework will be very visible within the Kanban system, and over time we'll learn to balance moving forward versus rework and iteration. And a team with experience will develop a good intuition about what the appropriate policies are. And secondly, building a high trust culture. How does Kanban help with this? Well, the first and most obvious one is the transparency within Kanban. Transparency, visibility into work and how work is performed and who's collaborating on it, that improves trust. Frequent stakeholder interaction improves trust. When we talk with people, when we meet with them, when we discuss options and make agreements, we're constantly building an improved level of trust between the individuals and across the whole team. Kanban also makes queue replenishment and pull into a collaborative game. The idea that this week we have 2 slots free in our input queue and our 5 stakeholders from different business units need to have a discussion about which 2 things we should start next for delivery, for example, within 25 days from now. This creates a game where there's a scarcity of available resource, and in this case, in the example I'm giving, there's a scarcity of available slots to start new work. Only 2. Perhaps there are 5 customers, and those people now need to sit down and discuss what's the best thing for our business to be doing right now, and what are the most important things that we might need 25 days from now. The challenge that creates a level of collaboration amongst those individuals and amongst their departments, which really improves the level of trust and helps to change the culture in an organization. Kanban also encourages frequent delivery. The idea that we set an output cadence and we deliver regularly against the expectation of that output cadence, and we don't wait for everything that's in progress to be finished. We use slightly more sophisticated techniques for configuration management and version control so that we can release work frequently, perhaps every 2 weeks, perhaps every week, perhaps every day, depending on what's appropriate for your business. Small things done often with reliability and predictability deliver and improve trust. Large gestures made seldom and often in apology for some problem, some lack of predictability that's happened in the past, those tend not to build trust as effectively as lots of small things done reliably and predictably. Trust is event-driven. Small amounts regularly is much more effective than large amounts less seldom. A package of service levels creates a promise you can keep. The package of service levels I showed you earlier offered an expedite capability, and as soon as possible, providing there's only one at a time. And we will deliver against a hard delivery date, providing we have a certain amount of notice, and providing that the quantity of work that requires that type of delivery is within reasonable bounds that we've observed historically. And then everything else will be processed within some given time limit. In that example, 25 days or less, 95% of the time. And we like 95% because it's the, if you're analyzing the data statistically, it's the second confidence interval on that data. It's the second confidence interval beyond the mean. And 95% of the time is a very good standard to set for knowledge work. Generally, the customers are used to a much lower on-time delivery rate, and hitting 95% tends to delight them there is no need for 99.99% on-time delivery in my experience. So 95% on time, second confidence interval against the mean, and that can be obtained by examining historical data. The net result is that we've created a package that contains an overall promise, and we're capable of keeping that promise for all three classes of service: the expedite class, the fixed date class, and the regular class, in that case the change request work item type. Linking cost of delay function and other risk profiles to a class of service improves understanding and trust in the system. So for example, if we demonstrate that work types, PTCs, which are tax table updates for the payroll system and have an immovable date when they must be deployed, if we can get our stakeholders to understand the economic concept there, then they understand why those items are taking priority. We're no longer using proxy variables. We're not using terms like, this is high priority, so it must go first. We're saying, this has a fixed delivery date, cost of delay function, and as a result, we're treating it as fixed delivery date class of service, and those items will take priority over standard class of service items when that is necessary in order to hit the delivery date. Service level agreement policies tend to be negotiated once for a type and class of service, and while they might be revisited from time to time, they're not negotiated on individual items. A class of service within a package of service level agreements tends to exist for weeks, months, perhaps even years, and we've certainly seen teams where they've set a service level agreement and maintained it for more than a year, more than 2 years perhaps. What this means is that there's a very significantly reduced overhead for negotiation, contractual agreements, audit, and arbitration, and therefore Kanban is very lean in this respect. There's very little waste, and it doesn't encourage behaviors that are typical of a lower trust culture. A service level agreement approach is a high trust approach. So 3, flow work quickly. Limiting WIP explicitly limits the liability of partially completed work, and limiting WIP encourages shorter cycle times and greater perceived agility. So by using a limited WIP pool system, a Kanban system, we encourage flowing work quickly, and we significantly reduce our exposure to the liability of rapidly depreciating knowledge work information. Visualization, workflow, and particularly visualizing blocking issues encourage better issue management, faster escalation, the use of root cause analysis, and perhaps a corrective action as a result. That encourages process changes that reduce the number of blockers in future and reduce the number of days blocked for work in progress. We've seen some really significant results using Kanban in this area. The best known case study here is from the BBC, and it's been well documented by David Joyce and Peter Middleton and some others. And this particular specific data will feature in an IEEE software academic paper that should be published, or perhaps already has been, but I haven't heard, but should be published very soon. Next, the scientific method, the model-based understanding of the dynamics that affect flow, that we encourage the use of with Kanban. So we encourage people to understand the dynamics of a bottleneck and how non-instant availability, particularly of shared skills and shared resources, such as an architecture team or a code security expert, the understanding how their availability affects flow helps teams to improve the management of it. We also encourage the sorry, I need to read my own slides. What I expected to see here was something that mentioned the use of special and common cause variability and the teaching of Edward Stemming, but it seems to be missing from this version of the slides. I apologize for that. 4, scale with minimal resistance. How do we evolve an existing process into, Kanban helps us evolve an existing process into a uniquely tailored solution because it encourages small incremental improvements. It encourages team members to study the dynamics of what's happening in the work and to use a model-based understanding to suggest changes and to make improvements. In lean thinking, we use the term Kaizen, meaning continuous improvement, and Kanban encourages the emergence of a Kaizen culture. So these changes are generally suggested and implemented by the team or the immediate management participating in the work rather than imposed from outside. And that means that the team are suggesting changes that make sense to them, and they tend not to meet with resistance for that reason. Evolutionary incremental change gives people time to adjust. It gives their emotional intelligence the time to adjust at the rate that their logical intelligence is processing the need for changes. Much resistance in organizational change tends to be for emotional reasons because the proposed changes attack the self-image or self-esteem or social status of the individuals involved. The evolutionary incremental Kaizen approach that emerges with teams using Kanban tends to overcome that problem. Transparency also makes the need for change obvious. The transparency and visualization of work and the use of models to frame that in the heads of team members really helps them to improve their understanding and to understand where there's a need for a change and which particular change would represent an appropriate choice and lead to an improvement. Just like frequent small things done reliably and predictably build trust, frequent small effective changes increase trust within an organization and trust in the culture and their ability to change and improve. And this leads to an improvement in organizational maturity and better quality risk management decisions, better quality decision making generally, and improved organizational maturity tends to allow larger changes to take place because there's a greater level of tolerance for the side effects that happen while a change is being implemented. And there's a greater level of patience that's driven from an understanding of the cause and effect, the scientific method in action, the understanding that we're taking action to relieve a bottleneck or improve the availability of a non-instant availability resource, or to reduce special cause or common cause variability, which is affecting our ability to deliver against customer expectations. Kanban also scales out in a service-oriented fashion. Earlier I walked you through the system thinking approach that we use with Kanban. We use that approach with an individual team, but we'd use the same approach with another team in the same building, or another team in the same business unit, or another team within the same organization that might be in a different geographic location. We'd use it with an application development team, we'd use it with a platform development team, we might use it with a user interface design team or an architecture team, and so on. If you can understand the concept of a service-oriented architecture for software, then Kanban allows us to take a service-oriented approach to our organizational structure and the way that we flow work around that organization. So we take the very same approach for each team. We do the same demand analysis, the same system thinking. We design a package of service levels, and we use that approach again and again across dependent teams. As one team using Kanban touches another team, we go and use Kanban on the next team. Because service-oriented architectures are flat and we're using the same approach every time, I believe that we have an approach that has a strong chance of success at very large scale. And we're beginning to see evidence of that emerging now in the community, and I expect some really quite significant case studies to be reported over the next 12 months at our conference in Long Beach and other conferences in Europe later this year. Large-scale Kanban can be implemented one team at a time. It can be implemented in an incremental fashion, just as the changes within any one of those teams are implemented. There's no need for a big bang, large-scale managed change initiative to drive an agile enterprise. Kanban allows us to get there incrementally and to see an evolution that spreads perhaps in a viral fashion across an organization and allows that organization to change and improve at a speed where the workforce can come along for the ride. So lastly here, and this is huge, adoption and use of Kanban does not require an organizational restructure. Typically, large-scale agile software development initiatives in enterprises require an organizational restructure. They require job titles to change. They require people to be moved around and co-located together. And all of this involves time and cost, and it drives up resistance. We don't need to take that approach with Kanban. We can start with what you do now. We can start with the org structure that you use today, and we can implement the Kanban system thinking approach with each element of that organizational structure. And Kaizen events will emerge, the organization will improve, the level of customer service will improve, the level of customer satisfaction will improve. So Kanban, a service-oriented approach to system design and change management. And just to summarize one or two points that many of you may have heard me say before, Kanban is not a project management or software development lifecycle method. It's a mechanism added to existing processes that will catalyze change, help you better manage risk, and improve customer service. As such, Kanban is not specific to software development. Smaller firms such as the Huddle Group in Argentina have implemented Kanban across their whole enterprise, including sales, marketing, finance, human resources. Huddle's an outsourced software development company that does work for customers in the United States, the media industry in Los Angeles, for example. They have 3 locations in Argentina and perhaps 200 to 250 people altogether. So a medium-sized enterprise, geographically dispersed, and they use Kanban to improve their culture, to provide for a happier workforce, to improve their staff retention, and to improve their customer satisfaction. I'm coming to believe that where knowledge work can be treated as a service, it appears the Kanban method and the use of a Kanban system can be applied to catalyze change, better manage risk, and improve customer service. This isn't just about software. We can do this across the enterprise. So in summary, Kanban helps with all 4 criteria required to enable enterprise scale agility. Kanban can help you make progress with imperfect information. It will help you build trust within your organization and a high trust culture. It will help you flow work quickly, and it can scale out with minimal resistance. It encourages a service delivery mindset and helps provoke cultural changes across businesses. And with that, just a reminder that if you found this interesting and you'd like to know more and you'd like to talk to people who are using Kanban at enterprise scale, please come along to our conference in Long Beach, California, May 3rd till 6th. Register at lssc11.leanssc.org. There is a specific track on using Kanban at scale in enterprises, and I'd love to see you there. Thank you for listening, and I believe that I'm going to take some questions now. My challenge is how I managed to see them on the screen.
So David, we've already received a number of questions on the chat. In the meantime, I will again ask all attendees to post any questions that you might have on the question icon that you see on the webinar control panel. David, a number of questions that have already come in. First of all, a simple question: that is bug fixing considered a class of service, or in other words, are defects, working on defects, considered a class of service?
Yes, they are. I didn't make a good job of highlighting that in the current book. Any type of work that comes with a set of policies that determine how that work is handled in comparison to other types of work is exhibiting its own class of service. And the policies you choose for defect fixing will be situationally specific. For example, you might choose a stop the line approach. As soon as we find a defect, we will ask the developers to stop whatever they're doing to come over and fix that defect immediately. And that would be giving defects a very high priority, and as a class of service, that would be an expedite level type class of service. So while I didn't highlight it well enough in the book, defect fixing is without doubt a class of service, and you may have several classes of service for defects. I think traditionally we've been used to the concept of triaging defects and prioritizing them differently, and that's certainly possible. You could create multiple classes of service for defects.
All right. Another question: the typical theme of implementing Kanban has references to scaling with minimal resistance and to handle it with incremental changes, and I think you also addressed that in today's webinar. And that indicates perhaps a slow or a gradual pace of adoption. So typically, for a small organization, somewhere between 50 and 100 people, what should be a sort of a typical guideline timeline for having to implement Kanban from scratch?
Depends where you think the destination is. I would suggest that our observation is that you can have a very high maturity organization starting from chaos. If you have 50 to 100 people, it's not tiny, but it's not big. I would expect to see really a very high maturity implementation where a team is capable of delivering on its service level agreements and is exhibiting a Kaizen culture where they're continuously improving. In other words, where they're exhibiting CMMI level 5 type of maturity, and I'd expect that starting from scratch in less than a year. We've seen examples where that's occurred within 9 months. We've seen examples of teams starting in quite a chaotic position and reaching an acceptable sort of medium level of maturity where they're delivering reliably and predictably for customers, and they're achieving that within 3 or 4 months.
Excellent. David, another question, and this one is close to my heart as well. Can Kanban tools help in scaling Agile or in implementing Kanban in the enterprise?
Yeah, that's a good question and a reasonable question. I decided not to go down that path with today's presentation because there's only so much I can say in 1 hour. I think it's essential that there's some tool adoption, particularly as we struggle to deal with multiple geographic locations, different time zones and distance. And I think it's also really important to have data and to have reporting and to use that data and reporting to drive the use of the scientific method for both suggesting changes and then observing whether changes were actually improvements. So tooling of some form or another is really essential if you're going to achieve a large scale adoption, if you're going to be an agile enterprise, and if your intent is to see the emergence of a higher level of maturity linked to a much improved level of customer satisfaction.
Thank you, David. David, if you don't mind, if I could request you to move on to the next slide so people can see the contact information. In the meantime, let me take one perhaps the last question for the day. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. The question is, what applications are, I guess this is, what applications for Kanban are you seeing for the educational enterprises, educational institutions, if any?
I personally haven't been involved in Kanban implementations with educational organizations. I'm aware that some educational institutions have done some work with Jim Benson and what he's been doing with personal Kanban. So I'm aware of actually some quite big NGOs and perhaps at the other end of the scale, elementary schools that have been implementing personal level Kanban, but it's not something that my business deals with directly. We haven't had any educational institution customers come to us, and I don't recall really seeing any reports at any of the conferences. I can't remember specific case studies. It strikes me that it's perfectly applicable. It's just not an area that we've been working in.
Great. So David, thanks very much again, once again for a wonderful talk and a very educational session that we've all had, and I'm sure everybody has learned a lot today and benefited from the conversation. To all attendees on the webinar, thank you very much for your time today and for attending the presentation. On the slide here, you can see our contact information both for David J. Anderson Associates as well as for Digite. Please reach out to us for any follow-up questions. We have a number of questions that remain unanswered, but we will make sure to respond to those after the webinar. The webinar slides themselves will be available. All of those who attended the webinar today will get an email from us with a link to the webinar slides. Thank you very much once again, and have a wonderful day.